I was always good at writing. Like that was clear from the start, English lit. I just had a knack for it. I was a voracious reader and all that kind of stuff. And then I sort of did dabble with drama in high school. I did like 2 years of it, but I didn't get on with one of the teachers that they had there. And so that kind of put me off. But I went to, in my year at high school, 2 comedians that you'd probably know, Lawrence Leung and Michael Chamberlain, were both in my year. And those guys, I was really good friends with Michael. I knew Lawrence. We weren't like best buddies or anything, but I, was aware of him. And those 2 guys in particular were always doing stuff at high school that was very kind of left of center and very creative and just sort of really, I always thought that Michael was just, even at the age of like 12, like Michael seemed to know what he wanted to do. Like he was always writing like little sketches and comedy bits.
Yeah.
And he even revived our high school newspaper, which had been dormant for 5 years because of some scandal in which like the students had shown the teachers, one copy of what they were going to use and then printed something entirely different that was very defamatory to staff. And so the magazine had been banned. But then Michael revived it and he ended up writing like 90% of the articles in it. And like some of them were like satirical and some of them were like hard hitting, analysis of like the school's culture and stuff. And so we started hanging out more and doing stuff together. And then he was the one who kind of talked me into, in my final year of high school, doing the High School Musical, which is Les Mis.
Oh, really?
And that really kind of sort of sparked my interest in like, holy shit, like I had so much fun. And, I went to an all boys school and suddenly we're hanging out with girls and, like everything about it was just.
Hang on, what school did you go to?
Xavier College.
Ah, okay. For a second, I thought you were about to say Brighton. I went to
no.
BGS. My brother got a scholarship and I was lucky enough to go there. Otherwise, I would have gone to CBC.
Right. Yeah. So, I think that was where it kind of started. And then Michael and I, in our final year of high school, we talked about going to uni together and studying film so we could become directors. That was the plan. And so, I made a bunch of short films in high school and, wrote a bunch of things. And then we went to Deakin University. In retrospect, we were accepted by both RMIT and Deakin, but we chose Deakin. And in retrospect, I wish we'd chosen RMIT because I believe the course I studied at Deakin no longer exists. The campus has been bulldozed. We used to be next to Monash Uni. It was called Rusden, Deakin University, Rusden.
Ah, yeah.
But they bulldozed it and turned it into a car park for Monash Uni. But even that was a kind of really kind of interesting experience. So we did 3 years of a media arts degree in which we just went out with cameras and wrote shit. And Michael was off doing comedy reviews at Melbourne Uni and stuff like that. And I was getting more into sort of straight kind of drama. Like I'd done a couple of amateur plays and then I got spotted by an agent doing one of these amateur shows. And then I got myself an agent and then started doing a couple of commercials. And by the time we left, so we left university and then we both started working for this production company in Melbourne called Exit Films, who are still around. They're a commercial production company. They were one of the biggest in Australia at one point. But back in that day, they were very, very edgy and experimental. They made ads, but they also, the guy who ran it was this Danish guy called Henrik Dannefjord, who was this real visionary. And he had seen one of these comedy review shows that Michael had been in and had brought these guys in to make a comedy pilot, a sketch comedy pilot. So Michael tapped me on the shoulder and said, we need writers and performers. So we spent like almost 2 years at Exit. We weren't getting paid, but they gave us facilities. They gave us an office and we had access to their gear and their editing facilities. And we were just out making stuff constantly. And so it was almost like the 3 years of uni was leading up to this. Like we actually did more work and learnt more about the industry in the 2 years after the formal studies. And Henrik was so ahead of his time. This was like 2000. And he had this idea that we should be making comedy videos for the internet. He had this idea that people would be watching sketches online. And so we were going out to meet all these startups. This was back during the startup boom. And he couldn't convince anyone that people are going to be watching videos on the internet. It's like, that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. Like he had the right idea. It's just 5 years too early. So
Yeah, in hindsight.
He couldn't afford to keep us in the office anymore. So he gave us like a deadline or a timeline to wrap things up. So Michael and Charlie Pickering was the other comedian who was there. Charlie Pickering, Michael and I, we spent the next few months, whatever it was, just writing a bunch of sketches and filming a comedy pilot. So at that point, I started getting like professional acting work. I moved up to Sydney because I got a job on an ABC drama. And then Michael and Charlie started doing stand-up. And then our pilot got seen by someone at Channel 7. And so we got brought into Channel 7 and we became enlisted in a show called Big Bite, which was like Chris Lilly and Angela and Rebecca. So that's kind of where it all started. So I was sort of at this kind of fork in the road where my friends were all going down comedy, and I even had tried comedy. I did a few stand-up gigs, but I was getting hired as an actor in dramas, like as dramatic actors. So
well, I found one of those on the beach, Seaman Byers.
Oh yeah, that was my first ever acting role. Yeah,
it's on YouTube. You can see the film. You can see it in Spanish.
Telly movie. Yeah,
it was a telly movie.
That's a hilarious story. That was my first ever acting role. And so On the Beach is based on a novel which is turned into a film in the 1950s with Gregory Peck and Ava Gardner. And it was shot in Australia because the plot is about an encroaching, nuclear holocaust. And everyone has migrated to Australia because it's the last continent that hasn't been affected by fallout. And Gregory Peck in it plays this admiral, and he's very stoic and very Gregory Peck-esque. Now, in this telly movie, which was a two-parter, they hired like Brian Brown and Rachel Ward, but in the Gregory Peck role, they hired Armand Asante, who was kind of like your typical, shooting something in Australia, they'll get some, B-lister from America, but he's the star in the production.
Yeah.
And so, I only had a few lines. I was playing a sailor who had gone AWOL, and, the scene is that me and this other guy have gone AWOL. We get a dressing down from this admiral who's like, the speech is along the lines of, we make a commitment to serve, your country, and your men depend on you, and blah, blah, blah. And it was a very stoic, noble kind of speech. And then, we leave. But when we turn up, Armand Asante's there, and the director, Russell Mulcahy, director of Razorback and Highlander, he didn't really seem that interested in directing anything. He was just over by the catering, eating stuff. He's like, yeah, you guys rehearse. I'll be over in a minute. And so Armand Asante, we start the rehearsal. He just starts going off script, like ad-libbing. And he goes from what on the page was a very stoic Gregory Peck-esque monologue to a real Al Pacino, any given Sunday kind of like, he's pacing back and forth and doing this growly kind of thing. And me and this other actor are like, what the fuck's going on? Like, where do our lines come in? Because he was not sticking to the script. And then he just explodes and he's like, you don't want to be on this fucking boat. You don't have to be on this fucking boat. I'll barge out of this fucking boat. And so like he grabs me in a headlock and like flings me off the boat and grabs the other guy and kicks him in the ass. And they call cut and we're like, what was that? Shit, I've got a line in there. And they're like, it doesn't matter. Like we're changing the scene around. So they do it again. And I'm like, this is my only fucking chance to get, I'm not going to let Armand Asante steal my line. So I'm desperately trying to spit out my line, but he's ranting and raving. And by the end of it, when they called cut on the actual scene, like the other actor I was with, he was fuming. He was like, fuck this guy. I'm like, fuck acting. I'm never doing that again. But then Armand Asante, like he seeks us out. His assistant seeks us out and he drives us in his private car to lunch and gives us all these stories about working on Mumbo Kings with Antonio Banderas and making Judge Dredd with Sylvester Stallone. So it wasn't all bad in the end. I mean, I'm surprised I stuck with it. But.
Where did he take you for lunch?
Oh no, like in the catering tent.
Okay.
But it was just like while everyone else had to walk the 500 meters, he drove us. His assistant drove us there. So it was pretty special.
I looked it through the whole thing. I remember you on Blue Heelers. I was obsessed with Blue Heelers. Never really got into McLeod's Daughters, and Home and Away was a thing that I was into when I was a lot younger. For most people, either you're really young or you're really sort of old. In that my mum's demographic.
Exactly.
When did you realize you were good at it?
I don't know if I know if I am. It's like it was one of these things where I knew I could write, I knew I could direct, I knew I could produce, and I knew I could act, but I didn't know if I did any of these things particularly well. But that wasn't a concern for me. I was like, well, whatever someone wants to hire me to do, that's what I will do till I can get to the next lily pad. So, my first day on set of a Head Start, which was the ABC show, I was absolutely shitting myself because I had no idea about the technicalities of acting. Like, they showed me my mark. I didn't even know what that meant. And then the director said, okay, we're going to loop the scene a few times. And so I'll call cut. And I didn't know what looping a scene meant. And all of it was learnt on the job. And I sort of came to realize, like, there's a lot of faking it till you make it in every industry.
Oh, yeah.
But it's a lot harder to fake it till you make it when, you're in front of a camera. Like, it's not like you can just go off and practice and practice and practice. Like, people get exposed pretty quick. And so, although I hadn't been formally trained, I started going off to do little workshops here and there. And then I had a bit of a gap between, before I did Home and Away, I hadn't really been in anything full time for about 4 or 5 years. And I'd sort of accepted that. And I was like, okay, well, I had this production company and I was writing and producing, and that was what I was doing. And then when Home and Away came along, and I sort of met everyone who worked on the show, I found out that they had like a full-time drama coach, and mainly for the younger actors on the show to help them. So I sought her out, and she's amazing. Her name's Jen Hegney. She's a fantastic actor in her own right, but a really fantastic acting teacher. And I just said to her, look, I've managed to work for the last, 15 years as an actor, but I've never really had a method or a strategy. I just kind of do it. Do you think you could help me with that? And she's like, absolutely. And so I spent the next 5 years on Home and Away really just sort of treating it like I was a mature age student, that I was going back to school, because it's the great thing about that show, and there's many things I loved about working on that show, but you just get your hours up. I mean, it's not always Shakespeare, but you are going to stay match fit because you're constantly reading scripts, you're constantly breaking them down, you're constantly looking for the fastest, way into a scene, and you just come out of it. It's no surprise that so many actors go on from Home and Away to, have really great careers, because, you just, especially when you turn up on a set, in the States or whatever, where, my very limited experience in America is that actors over there are very spoiled and kind of have the attitude of being stars before they've actually even done anything. Whereas Australians are very blue collar in their approach. They've got talent, but they've also got tremendous work ethic. And I think a lot of that comes from this soap factory, or even actors who come through theatre in Australia. Like, to do what an actor in Australia does, you're sacrificing so much. The work is irregular. You don't even get paid that well when you do get paid. So to still be doing it, for a number of years, you've either got to be very talented or very hardworking, and either of those two attributes will serve you well when you want to take it further.
Yeah, it does make a lot of sense. You're right. A lot of people who've come from Home and Away and Neighbours have done pretty well when they go overseas, or at least to the States. And that, it just goes back to that grind.